to the Tech Founder Show. Fascinating conversations with successful tech founders who shared their journeys, learnings, and insights with your host, Tony Zayas.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Tech Founder Show. I'm super excited. Today's guest is Manny. He's the founder of Blue. And I'm really interested in this one because you guys have a great product that's gotten really good feedback and grown pretty quickly. The description here that I found that I like says, Blue is the project management platform that brings order to the chaos of modern work. So Manny, thanks for joining. Tell me just a little bit about the platform, first of all.
Yeah, sure thing. So I've been running Blue for about 6 years now, and we sort of had a steady growth over that time. And it's a platform that's meant to replace some of the more complex and more expensive project management platforms out there. So, the usual suspects, we've got Trello, Asana, ClickUp, Monday.com. So we're really kind of going head to head against these multi-billion-dollar companies, but we're a small startup, really.
Yeah, and to me that's what's fascinating. It seems like you got some raving fans out there. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, before we get into that, I want to talk about that, like dealing with the red ocean, right? Because you're out there with some big players that have big dollars behind them, name recognition, all of that. But we'll get to that in a second. First of all, how did you come up with the idea for Blue? And do you have an agency background where you were using, project management?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the best way to start a startup in general is to experience a problem firsthand and then solve for it, right? Because then you have a really deep understanding of your customers' pain points and you can relate to that. I think often a lot of people want to just start something and they'll pick an industry and go there, but then they don't really have the deep knowledge required to be successful, right? In my case, I ran my own agency. It was called mad.co. And it's, was doing product design, branding, marketing, and so on. And building Blue was really born out of the frustration of using existing project management tools for that agency, right? So we started out in the early days with Basecamp, which actually I really like. But then we outgrew that, right? We got too many projects and it was very much just list based. So you end up like an infinite scrolling of lists, to-dos. So then we migrated to Asana, right? And really the pain points I had there were two. One was the price, to get the non-watered down version of Asana, you're talking about $30 per user per month, right? So if you think of a team of 30, 35, plus contractors who also need access, that can easily go north of $1,000 for a relatively small business, right? A month, which is a lot. Especially when you add that up to all the other subscriptions that I needed, Figma, Adobe, Google Workspace, time tracking apps, all that kind of stuff, right? So we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars a month on subscriptions, right? I think it's termed subscription fatigue. So that was one pain point I had. The second pain point was I really struggled to get my team to use it, right? I had to sort of be the guy with a big stick in the office, kind of beating everybody into submission to use it. And I also had the vision of wanting to bring my clients into the platform. And, the problem is that they also struggled to use it. It wasn't user-friendly enough. So at some point, that frustration grew big enough where I was like, okay, I'm going to hire an engineer specifically to build our own little platform. And so we did, right? We spent 3 months doing that. And honestly, the first version we built was terrible, really, really awful. But I had this captive audience, right? I had these 35 people who had to use it, and we were sitting next to them every day. And so I could get the complaints and feedback. And that gave us a very, very quick product development sort of feedback cycle. And so we improved the platform to the point where we could migrate our projects from Asana to Blue. And then about a year later, our existing customers of the agency started asking, hey, this actually platform's developing quite nicely. Could we use it for our own business? And that's where we decided to split that out and turn it into a software as a service model. Yeah.
That's really cool. I will ask, project management systems typically are like a necessary evil, right? Like, there's always something about every platform you use that it's just, there's a frustration. It's like, you got to do it because that's what's in front of you, and the grass is always greener. So what was the vision that you had for this more intuitive, user-friendly, like better experience? What was that before you built it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's also, in terms of part of the DNA of Blue, is how we came about is very different to how most of the other big players in the industry came about, right? Almost all of them have been designed and built in a tiny geographical area in the US, right? Silicon Valley. All the users, especially the initial users, are, typically highly paid knowledge workers in those areas, right? And so it's built with sort of experts in mind to some degree, right? And then it's sort of spread across the world, and it tries to adapt. In our side, we started out, when I was building this initially, I was living in Cambodia, right? So my very first customers were Cambodian enterprises, where the digital literacy there is not what it is in Europe or the US, right? Yeah. So we really had to build something that was usable for people there, and then in the surrounding countries, Thailand, Vietnam, and so on, before we sort of went international. And that really helped us to build something that was simple. And people in Europe and the US then found it refreshingly simple compared to the alternatives. And because we didn't, raise funds, we kept this, bootstrapped. Is still my company, right, to this day. I think we don't have the pressure of spending huge amounts of money very quickly, so hiring a crazy number of engineers. And then when you have that, suddenly you have to give them work to do, right? And so you've got this kind of proliferation of features and complexity. Well, for us, we really have to, to develop a feature, it has to scream yes, right? It has to really be something that customers are like, their hair is on fire and just saying, hey man, like I'm getting, 100 emails a week about this, right? Then I'm like, okay, like we're really going to then prioritize this. We're not just going to build it for the sake of building. So I think that's kind of a little bit of a difference as well.
Yeah, that's great. And then the initial customers that you got, those were people that were in there using it, that, as clients?
Yeah, exactly. So they were initially agency clients, and the first 50, 100 customers, I quite literally went to their office, set everybody up, in a meeting, got all their data in, like really, really sort of heavy hand holding. There's one customer that I think it was our 7th customer, which was a construction company, and today they're actually on an enterprise plan, so they pay serious money, right, for Blue. And I remember this was maybe 5.5 years ago. I went to their office and they were using Excel as a sales CRM, right? So they were deleting the comments in one field, and I said, look, I think we can do this better. And I literally went on the whiteboard and drew out the sales CRM process that they wanted, worked that out with them in an hour, and then implemented it in Blue and got their Excel data in. So that was what was required to do at the beginning, right? And that made sense, because if I have 7 customers and I can get one more, I've grown my business more than 10% in a day, right? So that really makes sense as a founder, right? Now, we're approaching 10,000 customers. It wouldn't maybe necessarily make sense for me to do that anymore, but we've got other ways of growing, right? But in the early stages, I think sometimes founders are scared of getting their hands dirty and doing that. But I think it's actually absolutely key to do it, right? Paul Graham, a sort of a very famous startup investor, he talks about doing things that don't scale. And I think in the early stages, you have to do that. And it's a bit counterintuitive, but it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that quite a bit, just talking to founders like you, that a lot of times early on, you got to do, it's the ground game. It's the stuff, to your point, that doesn't scale before you get there. So after that, fast forward a bit. So what are the other growth channels that you engage to grow the customer base?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, the challenge of our industry that's dominated by these sort of huge companies, right, have raised, in some cases, 500 million plus, is that we were basically, they removed us from being able to do performance marketing, right? Because they've spent so much money targeting similar audiences, where it doesn't economically make sense for us to run ads in the way they do it, because they will, spend $6,000 to acquire one customer that may pay $300 or $400 a month, right? And so they'll hopefully get that payback, in 12 or 18 months from now, right? So we couldn't do that because we couldn't go negative millions of dollars while waiting for the cash flow to catch up, a year or two down the road. So we had to had to think of other ways to do it. So the way that we've done it is through, referral partnerships, right? So basically getting other people to sell our platform on our behalf to take a revenue share. Later this year, we're going to release a sort of an official reselling platform where actually you can white label Blue and you can sell it as your own as well. So that's kind of enhancing that strategy. And the other way is really trying to provide great customer service and a great focused product. So then we got that sort of word of mouth going. And fortunately, Blue is a kind of business where an agency or a company uses it, and hopefully they invite their contractors or their clients in. So there's a natural tendency for that to spread beyond the confines of our original customer, right? But I'll stress that it's been a steady growth over the years, right? With apart from the last week, we've never seen like hyper growth in a particular time, right?
And I'll mention that we connected because we both have our products over on AppSumo, and you've done really well there. So I would just ask, like, is there a specific, because project management is so broadly and widely used, do you have a specific type of user that you're targeting as opposed to the big names that are out there?
Yeah, great question. So I think we don't go after super large enterprise customers, right? So like 5,000 person deployments, 10,000 person deployments, because the sales cycle there is extremely long. They've got a whole bunch of other requirements. So we don't really cater for that. Our bread and butter is typically service-based businesses, right? Agencies, can be law firms, etc., that are between 5 and 50 people, right? So small, medium businesses. And typically, the sort of ideal customer profile is where the founder and the CEO is typically the decision maker, right? So they're looking actively for a software, and they can make the decision immediately once they decide that they like it, right? So that's kind of our target audience.
Yeah, that's great. Now, how big is your team?
Yeah, we're a pretty lean team. We're 7 people. So everybody's an engineer, and then we have one person kind of full-time customer support. Yeah.
Wow. And before we jumped on, I mentioned earlier that, that conversation that you have with the customer, that capturing that information, what do you guys put in place so you can get that feedback? And how often do you make a concerted effort, whether it's your dedicated customer support person, are you actually talking to clients, and maybe not just ones who like have a problem, have a need, but what is that feedback process, like, to create that feedback loop? What is the process?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, the number one thing you can do as a founder, I think, is speak to customers, right? And again, especially a lot of people with a technology background don't like to do that, right? They don't like to get out of the office and speak to customers. I typically, I've traveled a lot. Often when I'm in new cities, I actually go and visit customers in person as well, right, in their office for deeper conversations. But I also try and have lots of short conversations, right? So typically I'll have anywhere between 5 to 10 customer calls a day, right? So I block out, 2 or 3 hours and have back-to-back 15-minute calls just to hear about problems they're facing. Could be an onboarding issue, could be an idea and a suggestion. So that's one sort of way to get feedback. 2, we have a community. So we have a sort of public forum where people can post up ideas and we engage with people there. And then also we receive feedback via email, right, to us through our support channels. And we try and capture all of this feedback. We log it in Blue, of course, right? So we have a project where we have all the hundreds of pieces of feedback. And then every few months, I sit down with my lead engineer and we decide, okay, what do we want to work on for the next 3 to 6 months, right? And shape our roadmap. And the customer feedback is obviously a strong component of that, right? And how we evaluate, what to build next. Now, of course, when you get, feedback, you got to be very careful about how you evaluate it, right? I can't remember who said this, but you don't find any statues of committees in public parks, right? So, you've got to take the feedback, but then you've got to evaluate the idea and say, okay, what's the problem behind this idea? How do I solve that problem? Not necessarily how do I implement the solution that the customer has suggested, right?
Yeah.
So typically, it means, especially for a horizontal product with Blue, that is, everything from lawyers to engineers and constructions industry, you've got to really look at, okay, how do we make this configurable, right? So if I solve a problem for a law firm, can I also somehow solve a similar problem for a construction company, right? So we got to sort of abstract away down to a root cause and then build to that. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is also, my vision for the product as well, right? So we're not, one of the core values is simplicity. We're not going to stuff it full of features, right? That's definitely something that's not going to happen, right? So then you got to say, okay, what are things that we're not going to do and where are we drawing the line? So for instance, I get asked about invoicing all the time, right? That's never something I've really considered. I'm sure it would be useful, but then there's also 1,000 other platforms that do invoicing. And then once you go down that rabbit hole, you need to then support payments, and then there'll be dozens of requests for different payment platforms from all over the world. Then you've got reminders, then you've got, okay, now you've got a link to Xero and QuickBooks for accounting and so on. So, you're kind of going down a rabbit hole, right? It's never, so you got to be very, very careful. If we were to commit to doing invoicing, that's probably putting one person on that for at least a year, right? To build it properly, right? We would ship the first version and then continue to maintain that. So it's a huge commitment. So we would only make that choice very carefully. Right?
Yeah, it's tricky. We deal with the same challenge in our product and our business. And as you look to add features, what else? What is it turning into? Is it moving outside of the realm of project management and into something else? And then it becomes it becomes a whole new slew of challenges and needs.
And also, I think the other thing is that sometimes startup founders, they want to sell to everybody, right? And I think that's difficult. You've got to also allow customers to self-select, right? So in our case, if you're looking for something that's easy to use and flexible, that would probably be a good fit. If you're looking for every feature under the sun, go to ClickUp, right?
Yeah.
It's fine, right? That's not a big issue. The market's big enough to have both, right? But if you're trying to sell to customers that, if I try and sell to a customer that's expecting a ClickUp and they go Blue, it's just going to cause me more support headaches, and eventually they'll churn, right? So it's much better to be honest up front, to say, hey, this is our product vision, right? And then you buy into it or you don't.
So I love that. It's so spot on. Was that your mentality all along, or is that something that you came to? Because I think that it's hard. It's typically you want to capture every customer, and so saying no and stepping away sometimes is challenging.
I mean, look, I think in the early day, and my agency, we went through the same process, right? When we started out, we did every service under the sun, right? At some point, because we had designers, I was like, okay, well, we could also hire somebody who's got architecture experience and also like do interior design for some customers, right? And we did that, right?
Yeah.
But we were only successful when we really niched down, right?
Yeah.
And so then you can really tailor your offer, tailor your messaging. You can instantly identify who could be your customer or not. And eventually we went down the sort of product design, UX, UI design specifically, right? So I think that's the same thing. And I think at the early days, it's fine to be a little bit opportunistic because you'll then see what sticks, right? So you can offer something a bit more broad, and then you'll see which customers really start to use it and really love it, and it becomes indispensable. And at that point, maybe that's a signal that you should look in deeper, and that may be your niche in the future, right? Where you start to niche down.
Yeah. No, great insight. And I and my team believe very much the same, the idea of narrowing. It feels so counterintuitive, but after you see the results from it's easy to buy in. But no, that's fantastic. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what I think is the fascinating one with Blue, again, because you're in this, I'll call it a red ocean, because there's all these big players. Everybody has project management system. Everyone's using one, right? They're a customer of something. How did you find the right, positioning and messaging? Did that take a lot of iterations? And how does that evolve over time?
Yeah, I mean, look, we initially, I mean, first of all, we've rebranded a few times, right? Initially, we were BLOO, Blue, right? That was the initial for several years, 4 or 5 years. Then we sort of rebranded to the color name. And then last December, we actually changed the logo to sort of professionalize things, and also launched, a brand new website as well. So I think your positioning is key, right? Absolutely key. But also, I think in a highly competitive market like that, it also depends how you define success, right? So we're probably, 1% the size of Asana, right? As an example, Asana is a public company, revenue hundreds of millions, right? But I'm a self-funded founder, right? I don't have investors, nothing, so I don't need to make 500 million to be successful and please the public markets and so on, right? And my stock price, because I have basically very few costs overall, right? I'm a small team and so on. So for me, Blue is already very successful as it is, right? I don't need to capture 100% of the market or whatever, right? That's not my dream, right? Like I'm happy with where we are at right now. So that's one thing. I think it really depends what you're looking at. If a startup does take on venture funding, then the sort of laws of returns of venture capital means that the investors are only going to be happy if you really scale to 50x, 100x, right? Because they need to get the huge returns back to pay for all the failures, right? Because most startups fail, right? So then the window of success is shifted drastically over to these huge numbers, right? So in our case, we took a different path. So I think that's really kind of it. And then I also look at, okay, what competitive advantages do I have being a 7-person team and having a lot less customers than Asana or ClickUp, where they have hundreds of thousands of customers, right? And the answer to that is far more personalized customer support, right? Like there's a lot of customers that have been there for 5-6 years, and I have a rule that if they email, like it just gets assigned to me, right? And then I'll email them back, right? I mean, that can't happen at those other scales, right? You can't get the CEO interact with the CEO. He or she is too busy, right? But in our case, we're small enough where that can still actually happen. And then generally, the reply times, I think our average reply time to tickets is less than an hour, right? 46 minutes, something like that. So far different. If you try emailing a big tech company, often it can be days, right? So there's those kind of things. And also the other thing is price, right? There's a lot of advice online about, okay, put your price up and price on value and so on. And, a lot of that comes from, funny enough, from the blogs of venture capital firms, right? Like, Anderson Horowitz, those kind of ones that they put those, but taking a different route, the way I look at it is, okay, if Asana is selling at $30 per user, I know, looking at their financial reports, I can see that the tech costs are a fraction of that, right? All the other costs are, huge personnel costs, marketing costs, and so on. So that margin is my opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are literally tens of millions of businesses who are paying $30 a month per person. It's just out of question, right? And most of these businesses are not in first world countries, right? They're in the developing countries, right? And so they're sort of priced out of the market. They still need the feature set, but they just can't afford it. So that's our opportunity, right? And that's why we price it at a level where nobody else can price. Right? Yeah.
And that's a great way to look at that. I think that's smart of looking at that's an area to compete, not just looking at that number as, oh, they're this a month, we're this a month. It's not apples to apples. Totally different model. To your point, there's a lot. There's a lot of bloat, in those big companies and what's going into that for them to be profitable versus you and your team. So I think that's a very smart approach. That's fantastic.
I think, and not to, I know you're American and not to criticize America, but I think also this idea, especially in Silicon Valley, that you need $400,000 a year engineers to build something that's high quality and can work on a global scale, right? I don't think that's true. I think there's an equally smart amount of people in the rest of the world. Sometimes they don't have the opportunity to build things at a global level. They can only build local apps for their local markets, right? But give them a chance, you can get some extremely smart engineers, and then you can play an arbitrage game, right? You can pay them a fraction of what you would pay an engineer in Silicon Valley, but still way above market rate in their local market, right? So it's kind of a win-win, right?
For sure. May I ask, where is your team based, or are you guys all over the place?
Yeah, so we're, I'm typically based in Italy. I've got my business partner, he's Vietnamese, but he's sort of kind of behind the scenes. And then our engineers are based out in Cambodia, which is where I used to live. I lived in Cambodia and Vietnam for almost 10 years.
Wow. Very cool. Just kind of to wrap up here, a couple more. First of all, I'd love to hear what's the future look like? What is on the roadmap? Mm-hmm. And I would say, for the next 1 to 3 years, what's on the roadmap? And then beyond that, what's the big picture for what you want to do with Blue?
Yeah, so let me answer the second question first. So I really don't have like an exit plan for Blue. Like, honestly, I love working on it. I'm very passionate about project management, workflows, that kind of stuff. I kind of feel like I have my dream sort of set up. So I kind of want to hold that on for as long as it works, right? So it could be a multi-decade plan there, right? So don't have an idea of sort of flipping it in a couple of years or anything like that. And then to answer the first question in terms of the roadmap, so essentially we're going to be doubling down on what's working. So it's, ideally keep making it easier to use, although we keep adding, potentially new functionalities. We're going to be making it even more configurable. So the idea that all the kind of project tools and project menus can be renamed, they can be hidden if you don't need certain project tools and so on. So really, you can configure Blue as you need. And then the real thing that we're doing this year, which is a big differentiator from all the other companies, and again, something that they can't really do because of the structure of the setup. So we're going to be doing a full white label version of Blue. Right? So you can put your own domain, which you can do already today. You can also completely customize the brand. So you can add your logo. The emails can come from your email address and so on, right? So then you can buy Blue, and you can, as an agency, you can invite your clients, and it looks like you've built your own custom business software. And that's something that these big public companies would never do, because their brand and the nature of their business, they don't want to hide. They want to be up front and center, right? You got a ClickUp, you got a big ClickUp logo there always, right? So that's one thing that we want to launch, and it was part also of the decision to come back on AppSumo, was to actually build relationships with all these agencies, so in the future they can then also get a white labeling add-on, right? So it's actually also financially sustainable, having potentially what turned out to be thousands of lifetime deal customers, right? Which was a little unexpected in the last couple of weeks, I'll say. And so that's one. And two is also launching a reseller model. So building on the white label, actually enabling companies to pay a subscription fee to have a right to be a reseller, and then we'll give them essentially almost a clone of our management interface that we have, so they can spin up licenses, set prices, basically sell Blue as their own system. And what we will provide is the sort of white label documentation, white label tutorial videos, and then white label technical support for end users, right? So then somebody can pay a few $100s a month plus a revenue share on licensing, and they can run their own business on top of our platform, right? So that's kind of where we want to go. And the ability to customize the template. So maybe you have an entrepreneur that wants to build specific workflow software for the construction industry, doesn't have $1 million to drop and years to drop on building a platform. They can leverage our platform, customize the templates, and then sell that to their clients, right? And keep the majority of the revenue in their own pocket, right? So
that's excellent. Sounds super exciting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fantastic. I will certainly be, following the journey, seeing where you guys are going. This is great. Last question to wrap up here. This is one I like to ask. If you were to go back in time, Manny, and you were able to sit down and have a cup of coffee with your former self prior to launching Blue, right, when it's just an idea, if you can give one piece of advice to yourself, what would that be?
I think patience. I think everything is often a lot more complex than I expect it to be, and it takes longer. And I think for the first few years, I had this thing that was always in a rush, and that kind of gives you a sense of frustration that things are not moving enough, and you pressure your teams more than you should. You want to grow at a faster pace and so on. I think actually when I zoom out and I look at the 6+ year journey, actually it's been completely fine, right? But for a lot of it, day to day, I just had this sense of kind of frustration of wanting to move faster and be more. And actually, I think that was really in my own head, right? I could have actually said, okay, you know what? If I zoom out a bit, I can see the growth happening, and it's okay, right? Especially if you have a multi-decade vision. Does it really matter if a feature is going to ship in 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now? It's irrelevant, right? It's if you're looking to flip in 2 years from now, then maybe there's more pressure, right? So yes, I think patience would have been the key thing now I've learned that lesson now, but I wish I knew that the first few years.
Yeah, if there was a pill you could take to have patience, that the creator of that would be a billionaire, right? So,
yeah, exactly. Maybe that could be the next startup.
There you go. Really good. Well, Manny, this is awesome. I appreciate your time today. I wish you the best of luck. Where can people, learn more? And if they want to try the platform out, where should they go?
Yeah, so it's blue, like the color, blue.cc. I couldn't afford the .com, $5 million. So yeah, you can check out there. There's a lot of information resources. There's a 7-day free trial, which you can also self-extend up to 14 days. So it's quite a decent amount to try out the platform, and also our team can also help in terms of data transfers and onboarding free of charge as well. So
excellent. Check it out, everybody. Manny, again, appreciate your time today. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you again next time. Take care.
Pleasure. Thank you.
This episode of the Tech Founder Show has been brought to you by Insivia. Find out how we help B2B SaaS and tech companies to engage, convert, and retain more customers at insivia.com.